I know we're into the lunch hour, so I'm not going to try to take a lot of time, but there are a few things I have to touch on that relates to issues that were raised here by Mr. Freeze in his closing. So the first thing I want to do is talk about investigation. There was an allegation here that there was a pressure to close the case. The officers that worked this case, Agent Valletta, other agents from the DCI that worked this case, worked every angle, worked every lead. There's pressure to close any case whenever they have somebody, particularly like Molly Tibbetts or any other person who's been the victim of a violent crime. But the pressure to close the case doesn't mean they go out and create their own evidence. If that were true, why wouldn't they just go ahead and do that right at the beginning? Go point the finger at somebody else. Do something, create something, plant something. That's not what they did, right? They go and chase the leads. They look at Molly's inner circle, right? They look at Dalton. They look at people who know her. They search 622 West Des Moines. They're looking for signs of violence, signs of breaking and entering, things of that nature. They don't find it, right? They're trying to shake this tree as hard as they can to see if there's any leads that fall, and there's not. Until when? Until they get the video, right? That's the lead that breaks this case. They follow it. They find the defendant, right? They bring him in. He makes the admissions he makes. The blood is in the trunk. What are the officers supposed to do? Start looking at Ron Pexa? Start going out and just checking other people to see if maybe, they had something to say about it? I mean, come on. The officers in this case, the agents in this case, the deputy sheriffs, the FBI agents, all of the people who were involved followed the evidence, and that's what we're asking you to do. The defendant was not targeted. That's a word that Mr. Freeze used. The defendant here was not targeted, all right? The evidence led officers to him. The video evidence led officers to Christian Bahena Rivera. They didn't target him. He targeted himself by becoming involved in this. No knife. I think he's mentioning this from 622 West Des Moines and the weapons. It's not a crime scene. And by the way, there's no evidence that Blake Jack or Dalton Jack are involved. Goodness, they ran Dalton Jack to the ground in this case. They interviewed him multiple times. They looked at him, right? They found out what his history was, what that he'd had this brief fling with another girl named Jordan. And by the way, when you're 18 years old, it's not like I've been married 32 years and I got 3 kids, okay? That'd be a lot different, let me tell you, okay? But he's a kid, right? What do if you're not getting along with your girlfriend? You break up with her, right? You don't take her out in the country and stab her to death. Does that make sense to you? Goodness. The primary crime scene, we don't know. Well, guess who had control of that? This guy. All right, who's got control of the Malibu for almost 4+ weeks? The defendant. Right? He's got control of Molly Tibbetts. He controls where she went. He controls where her body got dumped. He controls what the physical evidence is in his trunk. He does. The reason why we don't have whatever a primary crime scene is because of the defendant. You have to factor that in. Motive. He's not angry. Are you serious? He told us he was angry. The words came from his mouth. The defendant is a yes man. Not yesterday, he wasn't. He gave you a whole new story. Mr. Freeze touched on that, about Iris Gamboa, about his daughter, about all of those things. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But He's not a yes man yesterday. That's for sure. So tell law enforcement then about these other two men, right? So you're in a place where you can be protected. So tell them. I mean, you have multiple officers at the Poweshiek County Sheriff's Office. You're probably one of the most secure places in the county. You know, he's there with law enforcement. He could ask for help. All he has to say is, okay, listen, guys, I think I know what happened. There's these other two guys, these other masked men that are covered, that were in my house, right? I don't really know who they are. I'm scared for my daughter. I'm scared for Iris. Can you please help me? If you help me, if you get them here, I'll tell you what I know. But he didn't do that. You know why? Because it didn't happen. Why use Pamela Romero? Let me tell you what the flip side of this would be. So let's say officers went in, like the picture that you saw, with Agent Valletta and the FBI agent, neither speak Spanish. Or we have somebody else, there was a mention of Jeff Fink, who was a officer from Iowa City, who's not a native speaker. So let's say we try, Officer Romero, you're just not experienced enough. Okay, by the way, you saw her testify. She's an impressive young woman, right? I mean, she did a phenomenal job in recounting what the defendant said. The whole interview is in Spanish, but why not take advantage of a native speaker? Why not do that? Then we have a clean conversation. It's not going through an interpreter. You know, there's none of that. You have it, and she can then come out and say, this is what he said. That's why we didn't show you the video. It's in Spanish. Doesn't that make sense? If we had used Officer Fink, or if we had used Agent Valletta, then it would be, oh, hey, wait a second. Didn't they have a native speaker right there? Why not use Officer Romero? We know she's not experienced, but why not use her? The flip would just be true. But the officers chose to use the native speaker that knew Spanish, that was her first language, so she could understand what the defendant was telling her and relay that to investigators. You know, he wasn't so worn down that he couldn't lead them to Molly Tibbetts. That's true. Yeah, he does. They give him rest, by the way. I think Officer Romero talks about 9 times that they took breaks during the day. So it's not like an 11-hour interview where he's got somebody in his grill the whole night. I mean, he's sitting there at a table. He does get a chance to take a break. He gets a chance to eat. They're good to him in that sense. They are asking him hard questions, which I would hope officers would do under these circumstances. Dalton Jack, listen, Dalton Jack was in Dubuque, okay? He was working there actually the day before. I think he was in Iowa County working. That's what his boss said this morning. But Dalton Jack is in Dubuque. You know, phone records, people put him there. By the way, if he's off at 7, right, how's he gonna get back to do anything? And he's gonna have to what, take Christian Rivera's car if somebody has no idea, and what, go and chase down Molly where he doesn't know where she is, and what, he's gonna teleport himself back here in, you know, less than an hour? I mean, it's over a 2-hour drive from where he was working to here. Plus he had no reason. No reason. If the defendant's DNA is in his trunk, the response is, of course it is. If we would have found Christian Rivera's DNA in the trunk, of course it is. It's his car. It's a push. It's like the fingerprints that they talked about a little bit later. You know, people can touch things and fingerprints can be there. It was on items that were in the trunk. The fingerprint expert doesn't know where they come from, doesn't know how they got there. They're not associated other than being in the trunk. They could also be Molly Tibbetts's, by the way. Remember, hers are so destroyed that because she was decomposed. And then, so it means nothing. You know, all these things that Mr. Freeze brings up have to matter, right? He's poking holes, punching at our case, you know, telling you these things. But whenever you sit back there, if you evaluate them, they have to matter. Ron Pexa is 6'7". He doesn't describe the men in his house that tall. Totally inconsistent with that. Ulysses Felix, where is he? There's no evidence that he's associated with Ron Pexa or Dalton Jack or anybody else that they're throwing stones at over here with regard to who may be involved. There is no false confession, for goodness sakes. If the defendant falsely confesses, how does he take them to Molly Tibbetts? He knows where she's at. It's the one piece of evidence in this case, the one circumstance that completely cuts that argument down to the ground. So motive. There was another motive here, a sexual one that we know about, that we can look at. This is the document that shows the crime scene diagram. Molly Tibbetts' body, if you recall, her legs were spread apart and her knees were up and her underwear and her shorts were off. They were in a different spot. Her jogging bra is pushed up to around her neck. All right? The defendant says that he left her with her clothes on. That is clearly not true. The defendant says, before we get to that, he also says in his interview that she is hot or attractive. The way that it was interpreted by Romero was that the Molly Tibbetts, that he said that she was hot. That's why he was encountering her, because he found her attractive. That's why he chased her down. That's why he stopped on the road, right? He saw a pretty girl, and it drew his attention. Molly is found with no shorts or underwear. Her jogging bra, like I said, is pushed up around her neck, and her legs are spread apart. That would all suggest a sexual motive here. Guess who does not have a sexual motive? Dalton Jack or anyone else that's been erased here by the defense. The defendant wanted to encounter Molly Tibbetts by his own admission because he said that she was hot or attractive. And we have physical evidence at the scene that would suggest that there is also a sexual motive here that corroborates the defendant's involvement. She was found in that condition under the corn stalks, and he testified that she was clothed. That's what he said, but we know that's not true. Look at the corn stalks. They're not disturbed. Look at it. There they are. The corn stalks don't appear to have been disturbed. His testimony cannot be true based upon the evidence near Molly. So, which means the sexual motive is there, that her clothes were off, that he took them off, that he was there by his own admission, and we have physical evidence at the scene of the clothes being off and the corn stalks not being disturbed. It all provides another reason, which excludes other people. So why consider it, again, I've mentioned this already, why consider a sexual motive here? There's another circumstance that removes Dalton Jack, who they pointed the finger at repeatedly in this case, or anyone associated with him. It also excludes the two phantom men story. By the defendant's own admission, there was no sexual motive there. There was no evidence of that. So these two phantom men that show up at his apartment that he can't identify, exclude it, right? I mean, it supports it. It supports the sexual motive. These guys didn't have that. Dalton Jack didn't have that. It's consistent with the defendant's statement to Pamela Romero that he found her attractive, that he had found her hot. That's why he encountered her on the roadside. All right, the defendant's testimony here is unbelievable. Mr. Freeze has touched on some of this with regard to Iris Gamboa, to the daughter. Let's look at that. Why would he create a new story? Okay, why would he do that? He had the opportunity, by the way, to sit here in this case, to view the evidence, to think about the evidence. He knows DNA puts him, or puts Molly in the trunk of his vehicle. He now knows that. He did not know that at the time of the interview with Pamela Romero. He now knows multiple videos place him near Molly within seconds of running through the area whenever she was on boundary. We see his car within about 25 or 30 seconds after that. He knows after sitting through all this evidence, he's under a pretty big rock, right? And he's got to come up with something else. He's got to come up with a story to describe or explain away why he led the officers to the body, right? So what's he come up with? What's the context of this? He's now seen all the evidence against him. His statement with Romero ended with him charged with murder, right? He tried to give them a story. He told them what happened, right? Which is probably a lot closer to the truth. But now he knows that got him charged. He finds out later, as Mr. Freeze pointed out, that the DNA didn't come in until later, that it is all that Molly's blood is in the trunk. He has had access to all the evidence in this case. He has had access to the video. He knows his car puts him there. So he knows all that. That's the context here that we're dealing with. The defendant's testimony that 2 men killed Molly is totally unsupported by any other evidence in the case. Totally. He says that the 2 men that showed up at his house, or his trailer, are covered head to toe. He can't ID them, right? He covers them completely. This is the middle of July, right? And he says they're in sweaters and pants with stocking hats that cover their face. He can't identify them, right? Is that believable? The other thing that might identify these men is the vehicle that they were driving. He never puts them in a car. They just randomly select him out of thin air. They appear out of nowhere to select him as the person. And then what? They hang out at the trailer for a while. He's not real specific about that. And then not only do they appear out of nowhere, then they vanish into thin air once they get out to the field. And he can't identify them. It's simply not believable. These phantom men, think about this, leave the only eyewitness to a murder. They are attacking Molly Tibbetts on the road. That's what he said to you whenever he testified. And they stabbed her and they put her in the trunk. Why not kill him? Why not take him out? There's no connection between these two. They leave the only eyewitness with a vehicle, according to him. They leave, these phantom men, leave him with a cell phone. That's what he said. Actually, 2. I think he says Molly's cell phone is in the trunk as well. So they just vanish out of thin air, walk away in a cornfield after killing this young woman, and they leave him with transportation and a cell phone. That makes no sense at all. Why would they do that? Why would they even involve him? Why not just take out Christian Bahena Rivera right there with Molly? They've got a gun, they've got a knife, take him out. Pile his body into the cornfield. Why not do that? Why do they need him in the first place? It makes no sense. He's not thinking about that. You know why it doesn't make sense? Because it's not true. It's not true. He conveniently throws in the name Jack. Did you catch that yesterday whenever he was testifying? He spent parts, or one of the guys I think is in the back seat, and one of the guys says, "Come on, Jack." Really, so the one guy that they're pointing the finger at, the chief one, happens to have that last name. He throws that in. You got to ask yourself if that makes any sense at all, or is he just trying to point the finger at Dalton Jack to say that's who it was that was there and that took Molly on the roadside. They have spent parts of 2 days in this trial trying to identify Dalton Jack as the person with the motive and the opportunity to kill Molly. Dalton Jack is alibied, ladies and gentlemen. He did not do this. He didn't. He's working in Dubuque. I mean, so now his boss is going to come in here and make up records and not be truthful with you for what? Why would he do that? Why? I mean, Dalton Jack is alibied. He's working on a bridge. He got off at 7. He went back to the motel. He grilled with his co-workers. Dalton Jack is Alibi. Dalton Jack did not do this. If other men killed Molly, which is what the defense has put on here, what purpose would it serve then to include the following statements here? We've already talked about this in my first close, but what would it serve to include the following in these statements to the police? That Molly had rebuked him, that Molly had didn't want anything to do with him, that Molly had threatened to call the police, and that he was angry. How does that fit in with what he claims is the real narrative, that these two unknown men that were masked grabbed her and made him take her to the cornfield? It doesn't fit. There's no reason to offer it. He's trying to offer a reason to the officers as to why that happened. These statements only fit with nobody else present and with what the evidence was whenever he testified first, that there were not two other men in the car and that he acted alone. There is no evidence here that he told Iris Gamboa anything about a threat. Right? He testified here the reason why he didn't tell the officers about the two men that came to his trailer that he can't identify is because they had threatened Iris and they had threatened his daughter. But he doesn't. Iris Gamboa testified. Did you hear any testimony from her? She's called by the defense. Any testimony from her that, oh yeah, he told me? He told me what happened. He was fearful for my safety. He was fearful for our daughter's safety. He didn't say a word about it. There's no evidence in this case that he took any steps to protect his child or Iris. Iris never testified about a threat. So ask yourself, why? And my suggestion is, it didn't happen. There was no threat. There were no two men. He's made these men up. He's trying to get out from underneath that very big rock. He had a chance in this case to tell the police about the two men. He chose not to do that, if you're taking any of his statements as true that he testified to yesterday. The sheriff's office is a well-protected place. He had a chance to tell the officers that. He was even encouraged multiple times by Officer Romero. Is there more? Is there more? Right? She keeps coming back to him. Right? He has plenty of opportunity to do it, and he chooses not to do that. Why did he choose not to do that? He claims to protect his daughter and his girlfriend, who he had his daughter with. The best place to get that protection would be from the police. And he didn't do it. You know why he didn't do it? Because it did not happen that way. That's what it proves. All right. These are the elements of murder in the first degree. Each of these elements has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. All of the evidence here points to one person, and that is the defendant, Christian Bahena Rivera. No one else had a reason to kill Molly Tibbetts. His reason is not a good one, like I said before. When would it ever be a good idea, or you would ever have a good reason to kill somebody in this way? But that's what happened, and he told us that's what happened. He was angry, he was rejected, and he got angry at her, and he killed her over it. That's what cost Molly Tibbetts her life. The video, the confession, and the physical evidence in this case tell the story. There should be no reasonable doubt in your mind. Looking at all this evidence, you must be firmly convinced. I would encourage you to use your common sense. Look at this case, judge it with your backgrounds. Look at it, evaluate it. We welcome that. Use your common sense whenever you look at this, and at the end of the day, right, at the end of all of that, ask yourself, are you firmly convinced? Are you firmly convinced that Christian Bahena Rivera murdered Molly Tibbetts. The evidence in this case, there's a mountain of it. It is overwhelming. And it leads you to the only conclusion. You follow it down the path. All of the evidence in this case. Christian Bahena Rivera took this young woman's life. This is Molly. He took her. He committed the murder. Why? Why would this happen? Because he's angry? Because he wants to have some sort of relationship with her? Because he finds her hot or attractive? Goodness. That's what happened. Molly's no longer on this planet because of the defendant. All of the evidence here points to one verdict. The defendant, Christian Bahena Rivera, is guilty of murder in the first degree. That's what your verdict should be after your deliberations in this case. Christian Bahena Rivera is guilty of the first degree murder of Molly Tibbetts. That is your verdict. Thank you.